Okay, today we're working with the Council Lab EM 200-01 instrument cluster trainer. That's the first part in worksheet shop 11. And so we're going to be going over this briefly. You should be watching this before you try to go through this first part of that worksheet. And I've hooked up the power supply here. And I'm using the one from the Snap-ons for convenience. We have lots. However, I don't want these to touch, and so I powered the input, which are clamp-ons to this, with this meter, and I clipped it to this plastic, which is an insulator, and make sure I keep those separated for power. And so when I turn this on, then you'll see the power light here. Whoops, when I turn this on, you won't see anything. I turn this on, you'll see the power light right here. Now, with this, we have a schematic, and so this schematic is the schematic of this trainer. And just point out some relevant things. There's here a red and a black, this red circle, and this black circle down here is these two right here. And so that's your plus and minus supply, which is our supply that's wired up through here. And then we see these blue connectors here and here. These blue connectors are most of these. And then special 3 with the vehicle speed sensor, there's 2 sets, 1, 2, 3 go with these 1, 2, 3 pins here. So you'll be using this schematic to follow the procedure. You can see the first procedure here is to define what those are. So we're going to start then by looking at our supply voltage here. And as you can expect, we have our 13.8 volts there. And we're going to investigate our 2 different parts. We have 2 parts really that are of interest. We have our fuel gauge. So the first thing I'm going to do is investigate the fuel sensor, because that's one of the easier sensors on here, the easiest sensor to deal with of the 2 we're going to do. And so we got the fuel and the sensor over here. To do that, I'm going to hook this up to here. And if you look at the schematic, then you'll see you'll want to be using B18, and the instructions will also tell you that. And so right now, as I change this gauge, nothing's happening, and that's explained. So I'm going to go to minimum. I'm going to turn this off, turn it back on, and the fuel level changes. And since it's at minimum, now it reads 0. And I now have a reading on here. And as I change this, say, to another position, like 3/4 there, it changes here, but it didn't change there. So I have to shut it off and then turn it back on. And the voltage is changing, but to get the sensor to read, I have to jumpstart the process in a sense. The sensor we're going to work with more is going to be the speed sensor here. And that speed sensor then is controlled by this control up here, and it changes it immediately, so you don't have to do the turn on and off. We're going to explore that in 2 ways. We're going to explore it with the DMM and with the digital signal oscilloscope. We'll start with the DMM, as that's easier. And when we get here, then we will be looking at these 3 pins. So these 3 pins give us access to this. The first thing we want to do is try to explore those pins. And so the easy way to do that is to go there and to look at the voltages on here. And so hopefully it's obvious what 1 and 2 are. And as I change this, then it becomes obvious what 3 is, right? And so we can think of 1 and 2 as our DC supply to our sensor, and then 3 as our signal that we're getting out of the sensor. That's what's being used to drive the speedometer. And so that's the way that works. And so that's the first thing you can do, and you're going to be asked to check those measurements with this. And I think that's something that you'll all find fairly easy. The second part to that is using this DSO. And so the DSO is here, and we have these convenient pins here. We only have 1 set of these. They're the same size as a digital meter probe. And so you can stick them into the appropriate spots. Okay, I've hooked up my DSO by using the signal and the ground that's provided at pin 2. And you can see my signal on my DSO. And now as I vary this at minimum, a flat line, and then I start getting these marks, and they get they get different shapes. So I got my square wave from my Hall. In this box, we have some faults to put in. We're really only going to work with fault 1 and fault 4. Fault 1 causes the speedometer not to work, even though this is still moving. And so it's a connection problem. You have to describe that connection problem. If I turn that back on, it continues to work. And then fault 4, I'm going to put in. And again, that stopped working, but it's a little different. So you're going to have to look at your signal and your volts here to determine where the fault lies.